Penguin Random House Audio presents Are We There Yet? By Kathleen West. Read for you by Thérèse Plummer. To my family, the people who were there in the beginning, and to all of you I found along the way. Alice Sullivan. Alice scrolled through the latest posts on the Nextdoor app as she waited for Nadia, who was, as usual, several minutes late for their twice-monthly coffee. Meredith used to join them, but she'd announced a year ago that she'd rather see them on Sundays for power walks than lounge in a Starbucks. "Two birds, you know," Meredith had said, thinking of her workout. Alice and Nadia had agreed to the walks but still kept the coffee dates, a tradition since the kids had been in kindergarten 7 years before. Now Alice's son Teddy could wear his dad's shoes, and Nadia's Donovan knew how to code in 3 languages. All 3 moms had been nervous to leave the safety of Elm Creek Elementary when their kids started junior high that fall. But it had been a smooth transition so far to the big school, as they called it. Well, smooth for Alice's and Meredith's children. Donovan continued on his behavior plan. The neighbors on Nextdoor complained that local kids were tagging, a term Alice hadn't heard in ages. Shirley McIntosh, a frequent contributor to the app and one whose posts Alice, Meredith, and Nadia routinely mocked during their walks, had photographed a rudimentary drawing of a penis in some kind of pink paint on a porta potty at Elm Creek Park. "Who would draw a rocket ship in permanent ink?" Shirley had written. "Haven't today's parents heard of chalk?" Alice snorted with laughter. The drawing was definitely not a rocket ship. She took a screenshot of the post, which she texted to her husband, Patrick, along with a reminder about their daughter's imminent school conference. Nadia finally pushed through the front door of the coffee shop, her fleece jacket zipped against the mid-October chill. Alice pulled the scarf she'd layered over a silk blouse tighter against her neck. As Nadia placed her coffee order, Alice checked her earlobes for her lucky pearl drops. Patrick had splurged on them for their first Christmas together, and they'd become a talisman for the days she had important client meetings. Like today, with the Kerrigans. The Kerrigans' mid-century home would require a complete remodel, she hoped, by her design firm. At the counter, Nadia held up a finger, indicating that she'd be at the table in a minute. They'd have to talk fast, and Alice would then beeline to meet with Adrian's second-grade teacher. It'd be tight, but Alice would make it in time to hear that, as usual, Adrian was doing just fine. Nadia looked casual in her joggers, and Alice felt jealous of her work-from-home lifestyle. It wasn't that Nadia, a software engineer, wasn't busy, but she always seemed so relaxed, with no in-person clients to impress. Of course, she did have Donovan to worry about. Alice would try not to mention Adrian's conference to Nadia. When his third-grade teacher had suggested that Donovan had legitimate behavioral problems, anxiety, and perhaps oppositional defiant disorder, she and Meredith had basically scraped Nadia off the floor and fielded her hysterical calls and texts for days afterward. Alice had Googled oppositional defiant disorder then. One of the main causes, at least according to the internet, was a lack of engaged parenting. Alice secretly thought her friend had only half addressed that root cause in the years since the initial evaluation. She wasn't surprised that 7th grade had been a struggle so far. It had been tricky to talk about with Nadia, given how well Teddy had fared. "Oh, sorry I'm late," Nadia said as she sat. "Did you take the whole morning off for 80's conference?" Alice winced. She must have already mentioned the appointment in a text. "No," she said lightly. "I have a client meeting at 9:30. Think I'll make it?" Nadia raised an eyebrow. "Assuming a teacher will run on time at conferences? Bold move." Maybe your conferences run long, Alice thought. Adrian's should be a snap. "I think I've got a handle on her, and I'm only Miss Miller's second appointment. How late could it be?" "I'm sure it'll be fine." Nadia pulled her arm out of her jacket, and Alice knew this was the time to ask about Donovan. But she didn't have the energy. "How's your mom?" Alice ventured instead. "The same. But can I ask you about Teddy?" Nadia looked nervous, and Alice braced herself. Sometimes these queries from Nadia. Has Teddy ever, stolen anything at school? Or, how worried would you be if Teddy couldn't find a partner for the robotics fair? Required an inordinate amount of sidestepping. While she hadn't yet heard the story from Nadia, Teddy had told her at dinner the other night that Donovan had called their science teacher a fuckhead in front of the class the previous week. Sure? Alice flipped her phone over, ignoring an incoming text message from her boss. No doubt a pep talk about the Kerrigan appointment. So, this might be awkward, Nadia said gently. At least she's self-aware. Donovan told me something about Teddy. Alice touched the base of her throat, feeling the ridges of her collarbones beneath her fingers. About Teddy? Nadia squinted. Donovan says Teddy has some sort of a feud going with teen loggerhead. She shook her head. Feud sounds so dramatic. Oh, it's probably the wrong word. But apparently they're not getting along? Donovan didn't know the origin, but I guess there's been some stuff happening on Snapchat. Nadia took the lid off her drink and blew into it. Have I mentioned how much I hate that app? Alice remembered the day she'd allowed Teddy to download it. She'd paused in their negotiation, just as her How to Talk to Teens book had advised. She had told Teddy she wasn't sure he was ready for the responsibility of Snapchat. But as they'd reflected on his behavior, honestly and openly, as the psychologist authors of the manual advised, she had to admit he hadn't yet done anything stupid on social media. Alice monitored his Instagram, of course, and the one time Teddy had posted that vaping meme, she'd caught it and made him delete it within minutes. She was pretty sure neither Meredith nor Nadia had seen it, though they all followed each other's kids. But Snapchat loomed beyond Alice's parental control in a way that made her leery. Still, everyone had it, as Teddy argued, and without it, he might lose out on formative friendship interactions. This last part was Alice's rationalization. But Alice thought she was right. Since he'd downloaded the app, he'd told her about his streaks with friends and giggled with her and Adrian about the filter that gave them all flower crowns. It seemed harmless. I haven't heard anything from Teddy about Tane, Alice said. I guess they're in a pretty public skirmish. Nadia put her head in her hand, clearly uncomfortable. Skirmish isn't the right word either, but there are hashtags and kids are taking sides. Apparently, Teddy threatened to do something major to Tane. Nadia put air quotes around major. Anyway, Donovan's worried. Donovan's worried? Alice stifled an eye roll. Donovan might want to look in the mirror. Thanks so much for the heads up. Alice sipped her Americano and pushed her dark curls behind her ears. I'll check in with him tonight. She hoped her tone closed the subject. Alice loved Nadia, but wasn't prepared to accept advice from the mother of the most notorious problem child in the class of 2025. It's just that if Donovan, you know Donovan, he's no stranger to drama. Nadia reached out and touched Alice's forearm. If Donovan gives me a warning about something, I just feel like it's got to be serious. Alice blinked hard and fought the impulse to shake off her friend's touch. Okay. Don't say anything you can't take back, she warned herself. I appreciate it, but I don't really want to talk about it. She slid her arm away. Can we change the subject? Any interesting projects coming down the pike? Nadia picked up her drink and took a long sip. Alice snuck a glance at her watch. Meredith Yoshida. Meredith clicked out of the Nextdoor app as she lit the burner under the oats she'd prepared the night before. Shirley McIntosh had documented a spray painting incident at Elm Creek Park. A penis on a porta-potty that Shirley inexplicably misidentified as a rocket ship. Did she think the ball hairs were flames? Meredith screenshotted the post. She'd send it to her group text with Nadia and Alice later. Meredith lowered her nose to the saucepan and sniffed. She'd snuck in a little protein powder, hopeful that Sadie wouldn't detect it. It had been so hard lately to make sure her nearly 13-year-old had a balanced diet, especially since Sadie had forbidden Meredith from volunteering in the lunchroom at the...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?